Secret of the Naga Dragons, A Tale of Shastra, Chapter 2. Sifrid pushed a branch aside and looked down. The lake at the bottom of the valley was clear. The midday sun was just coming up over the Zipakna mountain range that was north of the lake, making it possible to look past the reflection of the surrounding forest and see the pebbles that formed the bottom of its bed. Sifrid was on the highest tree of the forest that bordered the lake. Below him were 20 other elves, who were also covered in mud and leaves to camouflage their scent and pale skin from the dragons. They had been waiting for several hours now, and Sifrid was becoming irritated. Patience had always been a necessary trait when he used to lie in wait for drakes, but it had already been more than a year since his last kill, and he had been in Delthurk for a week. He glanced upward. He was so close to the Zipakna mountains that it seemed more like a wall than the mountain that he would conquer, especially with the foliage above shielding him from the sky. By right he should be up there with an army, instead of crouching here with a scant group of soldiers. Delthurk was a necessary but still imperfect place. When the races began to take the dragon threat seriously, and waged war upon the beasts around their lands, the dragons gradually left their lairs and united here, at the Zipakna Mountains, the supposed birthplace of their kind. Fortunately, elves from various nations took the initiative and built the Delthurk barracks on a neighboring mountain range to isolate the monsters. When the mighty drakes abandoned their homes, Sifrid was of little value. He became an honored heirloom that Skandar was proud to have but never used. It was fine for a while to be the hero, but with the dragons gone, they gave him a shameful place within the army, instead, treating him like a regular soldier instead of the knight that he was. Finally, Delthurk had called on him, and it was because of Senator Mogurn's underhanded political maneuvers that he escaped the life of an ordinary footman. He was originally pleased at the news, until he discovered on the day of his departure that instead of thrusting him into battle, Delthurk was going to ease him into the war, as if the drakes were not the greatest of all the dragon beasts. They argue that even though Sifrid had killed drakes, the other smaller dragons were skilled in other diabolical ways that needed to be learned. Sifrid knew the truth. Other dragon slayers who ventured past the exterior mountains and into the inner ones were never seen again. It was difficult for Delthurk to continue to recruit when they could not even return the bodies of earlier knights. For him, they should have forgotten their paranoia. He was the Drake Slayer of Skandar. No matter the species of dragons, he would return successful from the Zipakna mountains. The dragons began to appear on the opposite side of the lake, where it brushed against the foliage. The first was the length of a wolf and half the height. It was similar to a lizard, except for the muscular legs and 4-inch-long claws at the ends of its feet. The creature dipped the lower half of its dark emerald-green head into the lake and began to drink over its prominent long teeth. A salamander, Sifrid recalled from his distant past. He had seen some hopping around several years ago, while traveling to other elf nations that required his skills as a drake slayer. It was the first dragon Sifrid had seen in an annual, but before he could study it, other shades of green followed from the forest. One dragon, taller than himself, was shuffling forward on its wide legs. Its tail stretched for several feet behind those legs and balanced out the beast's snout, which was just as wide as the body and almost half as long. Thick scales covered its body, and a row of protective spines lined its back from the neck to the tip of the tail. He recognized the species as Sobekian, from Spenta accounts of them. The Sobekian came to the shoreline and flopped into the lake, splashing the salamander, which leapt 2 meters away. The salamander rasped at the Sobekian when it landed. The Sobekian did not seem to notice, as it guzzled the churning water of the river. Sifrid's eyes shifted from dragon to dragon as more of them emerged from the forest. This blend of sinful creatures was exhilarating in itself, before the arrival of the serpent dragon, red as blood. The great red snake slid across the grass and into the lake as if laced with oil. The leaves below Sifrid began to rustle fearfully. Sifrid showed the other elves his hand to assure them that this horned dragon would be his conquest. These rare dragons were much fiercer than the regular green ones. Apart from their horns that were as strong and sharp as swords, their scales were finer and tougher. The serpent's length was thrice Siegfried's height, and its width was 3 times that of his thigh. This kill would be the perfect way for Siegfried to begin anew his destiny. Siegfried gave the command with his free hand. The Delthorc elves marched through the bushes, creating the disturbance Siegfried desired. The dragons immediately lurched towards the noise. With his sword in one hand, Siegfried leapt forward. Using a thick branch, he swung ape-like above the lake, and as he came down, drove his sword into the Sabekian's neck. Teeth and claws bared, scaly backs arched, and fire foamed at the dragons' mouths. Siegfried ignored all of it as he removed his shield from his back and wrenched his sword out of the dead Sabekian. The other 8 green dragons would be dealt with by the Delthorc soldiers who rushed forward on either side of him. Siegfried's focus was on the red, horned serpent that was already meeting his gaze. The red serpent came towards him, its lower half on the shallow surface of the lake, its upper in an S position with its slit eyes, horns, and snout vivid against the green background. The head began to whirl in sideways 8s before springing towards him, fangs first. Siegfried pivoted and arched himself backward, evading the head that flashed in front of his face. There was no time to be distracted by the burning breath. The coils were coming towards him from behind. He backflipped over it while swinging his blade as he did so to ward off his prey. The serpent reacted by shooting a burst of fire towards him. Siegfried stayed low when he landed in the water, and held his shield above him to divert the conflagration. He shuffled quickly on his haunches towards the serpent as his shield burned, and gashed its middle with its blade. It slithered back, hissing a cry that Siegfried had all but forgotten. There was no time to celebrate, even for a moment, not against a horned dragon. As deep as the cut was, it was not enough. The blade would have cut twice as deep against the scales of a regular serpent. Siegfried ran forward, keeping up with his prey. As if ignorant to its wound, the serpent launched itself at him again. Siegfried leapt towards it in response, shield supported by his shoulder. The red snout and shield collided. The dragon rebounded to the right, Siegfried to the left. He rolled onto his feet, saw red coming towards him, and slashed upward with his sword, tearing to the flesh of the bladed tail that had been whipping towards him. The serpent hissed again while coiling away, leaving a trail of blood so thick around Siegfried's ankles that it blanketed the pebbles. Siegfried exhaled a grin of triumph. The serpent was exhausted and weak and bleeding from 2 wounds. One more slash to its throat, and he would have killed a horned serpent dragon. He jogged towards it. The serpent stopped backing away and rasped, not even bothering to use its fire against him. Siegfried yelled as he got up close. He swung his sword over his head to strike between the serpent's horns, but the weapon jarred to a stop while still high above him. Then, a flash of green, a sudden force against his chest that winded him, and he found himself flying several feet from the serpent. Siegfried immediately stood up and readied his weapon to face the new dragon that had gotten in the way of his kill. But this was no dragon. This was something else. It was holding a sword that had a greenish hue to it, holding it with 2 green scaly hands while growling past inch-long canines. There was no time to study it. Siegfried launched towards it while swinging his sword, but the creature blocked his blows with its own, and darted around him as fast as the serpent had. Siegfried fought with rage, but the creature remained too quick for him, and was skilled enough to use its strength against him. For the first time, Siegfried desired help. He broke away and looked around, but there was no help to be found. Most of his support was already dead, cut down by the sword that was now turned against him. While he had been fighting the horned dragon, this creature had decimated his men. Had it been a ploy? Were the dragons capable of such a scheme? The horned serpent was no longer huddled pathetically in a corner either, but was shooting its flames alongside the other dragons toward the last remaining elves. Were the dragons able to have a battle plan? Siegfried growled and rushed the abomination. He was twice the size of the creature. Reasoning that he had more strength, Siegfried hammered both sword and shield down upon the beast. But it blocked the blow with its sword. They stood locked in that position, Siegfried trying to use his height over the creature to bear it down as he stared at the black pupils of its eyes. Suddenly, a conflagration came to life around his opponent's blade. He was thrown several feet backwards. Blinded by the blade's sudden flames, Siegfried swung his own sword madly in front of him. Still, it was a shock to him when the fiery sword shot into his chest and out his back.